Hi, all. So my name is Jeff Hulett. I'm a decision confidence builder and lead Personal Finance Reimagined, a decision making and financial education platform. I teach at James Madison University and have been in banking and finance most of my career. So every month we tackle a different high impact decision and personal finance topic. This month is Robo-advisor month. The idea is to help you create a consistent, repeatable decision process to help you make the best robo decisions and, of course, other important decisions. Up to this point, you've heard me discuss robo-advisors, what they are, how they fit into the broader investment strategy, how they compare with human wealth advisors, and how to make the best decisions among robo alternatives. So enough about me. It's time to get another super great voice involved. So I am super excited to talk with Josh Mount today. So Josh is a robo-advisor expert and brings a great perspective and experience to robo-advising. Josh is the Chief Technology Officer at New Rhodes Construction and the Hard Bean Brunch Company. Josh is also a YouTuber and entrepreneur. So Josh brings tech to business and makes technology accessible for many. Financial topics like robo-advisors are right on focus for him. They're a super important part of Josh's focus. So Josh, welcome. I'm just so glad that you're here.
Hi, Jeff. Thanks for having me. I love everything you're doing at Personal Finance Reimagined, and I'm glad to talk about this because I think robo-advising and robo-investors are an important part of the future of investing. So super excited to get into it.
All right. Well, let's roll then. So, Josh, actually, before we jump right in, I want to sort of start with a little bit of a different question. So Josh, I have no idea how old you are, right? And I don't want to know, but you come across as being a very young guy. I have to admit. So, when I think about what you do, and I had a chance to go through your videos, your wonderful YouTube channel at Josh Mountain, and there's just a lot of great stuff out there. So there's two things that when I sort of summed it up, at least when I was sort of running it through my head, two things kind of popped out. One, you are a young person, and I feel like you have a way of identifying with folks that can really use it. So, like for me, when I talk about it, I'm sort of an older head, I've been in the business or whatever, but I'm somebody who perhaps has done it. Whereas you come across as somebody that's almost like you can do it. I can do it. I'm like you, and you can do it too. So that to me, that's a super inspiring message. So that's one. Number two is because I feel like you're such a young guy, I feel, when I watch you, there's something that really comes off about you, which is what I'll just sum it up as wisdom. Okay. What I mean by that, when you talk about like being your own worst enemy, right? And some of the things that you talk about in your videos, kind of getting into the behavioral psychology. And honestly, that's something that I talk a lot about too. But I'll be honest with you, I'm in my 50s. I have figured out how to not be my worst enemy by being my worst enemy. And I finally came to it, right? But for you, you're a young person, right? So I don't think there's a lot of people, and that's what I call wisdom, right? Figuring out how not to be your own worst enemy when you're younger. So my first question, honestly, is just more related to how, right? Like, did you have an influence? Did you have people in your life? Did you come across this more organically in terms of bringing that kind of wisdom to know, to even, talk about not being your own worst enemy?
I think for this, the biggest thing that I've identified because I've talked about with this with all my friends, I've been like, oh, you guys are investing, right? And having those organic conversations with people. And something that's been really surprising to me is how much people my age are avoiding investing and it like almost a taboo almost as if talking about money or investing is a bad thing. And so I really wanted to dive deep on this, on what the psychology behind why people my age are so averse to investing. And what I found is, first and foremost, for some reason, people my age, it's very, very difficult to understand and create goals that you aren't going to see the results of for 20, 30, 40 years down the line. If you go to a 5-year-old and try and explain to them what life's going to be like in their 20s, they can't visualize it at all. They don't have any concept of that.
Right.
It's the same thing with people in their 20s. If you go to someone and say, hey, if you start investing when you're young as soon as possible, you're going to see the benefits of that, 20, 30 years down the line. They can't comprehend what 50 years old is actually going to look like. And so
Right.
they go into it with that mindset of needing to see the short-term gains, not
Right.
understanding that long-term perspective, specifically when it comes to investing. And they try and take those shortcuts and short decisions that honestly end up leaving you worse off than if you just hadn't started at all.
Okay,
So for me
but I
personally,
have to ask you though, Josh, how
yeah,
did you get there, right? Like
I
did you like I'll give you an example. Like in my class,
yeah,
I actually, we model the time value of money curve and we'll show, hey, if you make this level of investment based on the salary after you graduate, you can get to the number we put out in front of them is $16 million
mhm,
after 40 years. So we kind of show a path through like a reasonable, sort of set of savings assumptions and, job growth in terms of salary and stuff like that. But I get the feeling you did something different. So I'm just wondering. Yeah.
I have to give a shout out to my 10th grade business teacher. This is way back in high school, and we walk into his class, and he's a very intimidating man in a suit, and he walks in, doesn't say anything, doesn't introduce himself, walks up to the front of the room, turns on the projector, and says, "I'm going to teach you all how to make $1 million." The room goes quiet. Everyone goes silent. They're like, "Whoa, $1 million? That's a lot of money." And he very simply explains the whole process of if you start investing, pulled out the spreadsheet, compound interest, went into all those details of explaining this is how your wealth can grow over time. And at the end of it, it was kind of a shift for me where I was like, I want to learn more about this. I want to know more research. Like, can you make this faster? How can you do? And then he said, yep, and you can do it all by the time you're 65. And then the whole class, went, oh, 65. Well, what's $1 million to me if it's 65? I'm looking around and I'm like, it's $1 million, or we're talking about the same thing, right?
Right.
And so that was
Well,
my
that's great.
first kind of icebreaker to it, where it was like how to make $1 million. And so from there, I kind of went on a deep dive through YouTube and other sort of platforms and resources about this. I was like, is this a real thing? Is he
Right.
just being hyperbolic? But no, it's absolutely grounded in fact with that. And so
Right.
what ended up happening as a result of that was our kind of term project for the semester was, okay, we're going to give you 100,000 imaginary dollars, and you're going to be investing them in the stock market, creating a diverse portfolio of investments. And at the end of the term, you're going to be, not graded on how well your investments performed, but how well your strategy evolved based on what you saw in your investments. And when I ended up placing first in that, it was kind of like a secondary thing that, okay, maybe there's something to this. At the time, obviously, I was too young to invest, but that first kind of icebreaker, that creating wealth at a young age to
Right.
see it as you grow older is a possibility.
Well, I have to tell you, Josh, I think your 10th grade business teacher is brilliant because I have to, like, when I was in undergraduate school, I took an investment class, and it's probably no different today. I hope it is, but maybe it's not. Where at the beginning of the semester, you get an imaginary $1 million, and the person who wins is the person who makes the most money in 3 months. Right. So if you think about it, what they're teaching you to do is to be a short-term investor. And
Mhm.
I didn't really unwind that until much later in my life, where I was like, wait a second, that didn't make any sense. So anyway, I love that, what he's doing. So, well, and this kind of leads me into a little bit. You've already talked a little bit about this, but talking to your friends, but I think of a particular challenge, and especially in the United States. I mean, I think of low savings rates. So especially for younger folks starting out, I tend to think the bigger problem for people to create wealth is first and foremost a savings discipline, right? And then once you do this, whether you direct it to robos or other appropriate investments, that's when the magic happens. But to me, sometimes it's that first step, like, how do I get the discipline of taking that cash, whatever and getting like really real with it, right? Like, here I am I just got my paycheck or just showed up, in my bank account. It's X number of dollars. Do I go out and spend it? That would be maybe the thing to do. Or do I have a process for managing it in a way to make sure that I'm, kind of putting it on that long-term wealth track. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about this, and especially for you, because I have a feeling you have a great strategy for this. So I was just curious how you actually went about creating that sort of saving strategy for yourself and how you talk to others about that.
For sure. I think what's really interesting to me is the idea that the formula is out there. The formula is out there, and it's a very simple formula if you can follow it and be disciplined in the way that you follow it. And that's pay off all of your high interest debt, because if you're investing and trying to make money from compound interest and you have high interest debt eating away, it's going to counteract the effects of you actually investing. Making sure that you have 6 to 12 months of an emergency fund saved up in the event that anything happens. And then once you've got those two things in place, actually making sure that you live on less than you make and paying yourself first. For me personally, the strategy that I use is complete automation, is that I have what I call an investment tax, where on the day I get paid, whether you're a salary worker and you get paid, every second Friday, or, every paycheck, whenever that happens to be, I have an automated investment set up through my bank and set up through my investments, so that it automatically transfers a predetermined amount of money to a specific account. So say I want to save for a purchase or a vacation or something in the short term, or I want to save for investments, I have that money automatically transferred, and I know ahead of time that that's automatically going to be transferred. So what that does is it prevents me from having access to those funds so that I can spend it before I actually have it. And so by doing that, both on my investments and on my savings side, it removes the thought of it. Because I think the hardest part for people my age is the idea that every time you go into your bank account and have to manually do that transfer, you're thinking about it, you're spending time thinking about it, you're thinking about, oh, well, I could buy the new pair of shoes with that, or I could do this. And by removing that thought, by completely automating it, it takes it out of your mind, and it makes it much easier to actually build that up as a long-term habit for you, because it's all automated.
Right. You're behavioral economists call that a commitment device, right? So it even goes beyond a habit. It is a habit, but it's basically enforced with a commitment device, right? So it's almost like even if you didn't have that commitment device or didn't have the habit, you'd have that commitment device to make sure, oh, $500 gone. I never see it. And I love the idea of almost like not torturing yourself, like in managing your your view of what's available to you as an actually a smaller number that's still appropriate to manage your expenses and the fun you want to have, but it's like, oh, it's just gone and I know it's in a good place. So no, that's no, I love that. And I think I do wonder, I'd love to see statistics on that, but I have a feeling people like you are in the vast minority. I'm guessing that doesn't happen as often. Like, I mean, I talk about that in my class, and of course it's an encouraging thing, but I don't actually know, and I'd love to know, right? Like how many people actually have those sort of automations set up to just make sure it happens?
Very few. And I've talked to tons of my friends about this, and there's this idea that I'm like, oh, these are things that just make sense. It's the logical approach, but people are obsessed with that short-term gain that they can't take a step back for a moment and think about the bigger picture. And even when it does come to something like, I specifically have accounts for things I will do, like purchase within 12 months. And so that money automatically comes out for maybe a trip or maybe a big purchase that I want to make. And even though you're seeing those short term within 12 months, people still are averse to doing it because for some unknown reason.
Yeah. No, it's human nature, I suppose. But okay. No, that's good. Thank you for that. I think that is spot on. And like I said, very consistent with the messages that I give in my class as well. So you're a great example, Josh. So I like I mentioned before, I in preparation for our discussion today, I've been through lots of your videos, and I have to admit, I really do love what you're doing. I love the Josh Mountain YouTube channel. There's a financial part of it, and of course more that technology part of it, but it's all very related. So it seems like a really, really good thing. So. But one of the things in one of your videos you talked about around robo-advisors was you mentioned the early days of robos, and I
Hmm.
think you mentioned like Wealthfront and Betterment. For me, maybe because I'm a little bit older, but to me, robos seem like so young. I
Yeah.
know they didn't just happen yesterday, but it's not like there's a long history of them either. So I was just wondering, like, how have you seen robos evolve over time, perhaps 10 years ago versus today? And then I'm wondering about where do you see it perhaps going, or maybe where they are today in terms of what are some of the newer and the capabilities, or some of the capabilities that you like versus perhaps don't like as much.
Hmm. So I definitely think first and foremost, as a technology guy, that robo-advisors as we know them today could not exist without the smartphone. And I think seeing
Right.
Betterment being founded in 2008 is one of the best examples of that. It was the perfect condition for a platform like Betterment to come into being right after the 2008 financial crisis, where there's a lot more scrutiny on financial institutions to be better to their investors. And with the introduction of the smartphone, specifically the iPhone, the year prior, to be able to build clean, easy to understand user interfaces that are very simple to use. It really created the perfect storm for a platform that what I call the three base values of an actual robo-advisor, and those are having a very simple user interface that you don't need to have a ton of investment knowledge to actually understand how to use it, having low fees as compared to traditional financial advisors, and most importantly of all, a very low barrier to entry, being that you don't have to invest
Right.
$10,000 off the bat to immediately get into that. You could start with, $0 or $10, or I know some have a minimum fee set, but compared to traditional financial, institutions of the past, the ability
Right.
to democratize it so that it opens it up to a wider audience was really what Betterment started and created those base principles for what a robo advisor should be. And
Right.
then in 2011, when Wealthfront was founded, and I've seen this continue since Wealthfront's founding, they've continued to add features on that just make sense. With
Right.
Wealthfront, the biggest change obviously was tax loss harvesting, actually incorporating that aspect where you could, have based on everything that the robo-advisor does, which again at the baseline value is having an algorithm based on, market theory actually go and create your portfolio for you and rebalance it as the market adjusts. Wealthfront introducing the ability to tax loss harvest just made it easier for investors and people who didn't have as much information to receive more value without having to understand more of what was happening. Again,
Right.
making it a lower barrier to entry, making it easier
Right.
to use, and making it more smart for everyone.
So it's funny, Josh. I can remember learning about tax loss harvest, and I have to admit, I had no idea what it was. You'd think I'm a finance and econ guy, but it's like I kind of basically understood it, but I didn't really understand it. It was kind of nice. Like I remember going to Wealthfront and learning about what they're really doing, right? And it's fascinating. And the more I talk to like regular advisors, like like CFP type human advisors, they talk about tax loss harvesting, and they're kind of like, yeah, that's part of the blocking and tackling, right? It's how you improve your yield and by doing the proper tax loss selling. So anyway, no, that's pretty interesting. I was curious though. I mean, do you see anything? So I have a thesis, and my thesis is that you get 80 to 90% of the value out of the very basic blocking and tackling, right? Which is
Mhm.
automations, get your money there, set up, some sort of risk-based strategy, right, around your risk personality, like Wealth and Betterment both have that, where you sort of declare how you feel about risk, and then they assign portfolios based on that. And then they'll do the tax loss harvesting, and they do regular rebalancing. Um, I'm just curious, is there something else? And that sounds like a real basic set of services, but to me, that's like, well, that if you can just do that, you'll get to that $16 million kind of thing, right? And so
Mhm.
anyway, I'm just curious if you see there's something else on the horizon, or other things about the robos that you kind of like.
I think the biggest thing would be what a lot of modern robo-advisor institutes are doing is that they're incorporating it not just in excuse me, particular stocks, but also into all other aspects of financial life. For example, there's a lot of the robo-advisor that I use, Wealthsimple, they have just recently introduced a new partnership that they've done where you can actually get a rebate on your mortgage, and that money goes directly into your investment account to further snowball your investments if you partner with the institution that they partner with, which I find really interesting. And the way that they've done it is if you transfer more money to them, you get more of a rebate, so it grows your wealth further in the long term, but also you get a good deal on a mortgage, which is weird because when you think
Right.
about it, traditional
Huh.
robo-advisors have those baseline values where it's, easy to invest, easy to check your portfolio, make changes. But
Right.
now what we're starting to see is that they have like a cash account where people will
Right.
use a robo-advising platform as opposed to a traditional bank account, where
Right.
it's
Right.
essentially you've got a debit card, and it all comes down to, I think, the more assets under management a robo-advising platform has, the
Right.
more power it has to give back to its users and to continue to grow. And I
Right.
find that just very interesting. And so, with that being said, that's what I've seen happen in a lot of the
Right.
founding of a lot of new robo-advisors too, is
Right.
that they take those principles that Betterment and Wealthfront established way back in, I say way back, but 2008 to
Way
2000,
back for you,
2011.
yeah.
Yeah. and and they take those principles, and new robo firms are created on top of those basic principles, but introduce a new level of value each time. So what we're finding now is that in the new robo firms that are being created and the ones that exist today, they are simply all just taking each other's really good, valuable features and just building them. And so they end up being, and what I think we're going to see it eventually snowball towards is that those robo advisors will become all-in-one investment platforms, potentially rivaling banks, I think, in the long term, again, because with how simple it is to use, many modern banking platforms, although they have online banking, they don't have the intuitive nature of robo-advisors. They don't provide the financial education to people, and they really just don't perform. They don't have the same thing that robo-advisors do now, which is that lower barrier to entry, which I
Right.
think is very interesting.
Yeah. No, that I think you raise a good point. That they're kind of, it's almost like they're getting a scale, right? And they're getting to a point where they can start flexing their muscles. It's been as a market observer, it's been really interesting to see, how the big investment banks like Fidelity and Schwab, they have their own robos now, right? And so now these smaller kind of monoline robos are having to compete with that. And I think to your point, how they're competing is they won't necessarily have the capital to have their own bank, but they're gonna have banking services that can effectively compete with, some of the big boys.
Exactly.
So anyway, okay. Well, so Josh, I just wanted to maybe switch gears here just a little bit. And I know you're the chief technology officer of a couple companies, so this is something probably near and dear to you. But I wanted to switch gears to a little more on the technical side, and really just to ask the more basic question around artificial intelligence and machine learning. And
Hmm.
so this question is almost like if I ask a couple different people, I usually get a different answer. So I'm really interested to hear what you have to say. But some people, when I ask, does a robo use AI? They'll say, no, not really. It's really just a set of rules that they use to do some balancing. It's very sophisticated, but it's technically not artificial intelligence. But then I'll talk to other people and I say, yeah, actually, they really are using forms of artificial intelligence and machine learning. So I was just curious. I have a feeling you have a good perspective on that. So I was just wondering what your thoughts are.
Yes, this is an interesting one and a bit controversial, I might add, because I think it all depends on what your definition of artificial intelligence truly is. Many people out there, I've seen many people consider that those algorithms, those very complex algorithms with a strict set of rules, people would consider those AI. And
Okay.
me personally, my perspective on what I would consider AI is a system that can automate itself, where it's continually working without further user input. So that line that gets drawn between you program it, you give it the set of instructions, and then you stop giving it inputs, and it continually grows and evolves. Once you pass that point, it becomes AI. And
Right.
so I think for robo-advisors, they're not at the point yet where I would consider
Okay.
them AI because they are still using that strict set of rules established by a human. And it's actually
Right.
very interesting because across the whole industry of AI as a whole, we're starting to see that now is that there is a middleman who steps in and makes minor tweaks and adjustments to the AI. And the thing is, if you're needing to make those minor tweaks and adjustments, that's not an AI because an AI should be
Right.
able to make those tweaks and adjustments itself.
Yes.
That is
Right.
still just a very complex algorithm. That
Right.
being said, the complexity cannot be understated
Yeah.
like here. The algorithms that they have running these platforms are very complex. And I think what might be interesting is that I think we're going to see it because, again, it's a very touchy subject, having an autonomous system literally run itself and make its own
Right.
decisions. Um, Especially when it comes to the financial sector with people's money on the line. I think we're going to start to
Yeah.
see that and in very small steps, very small increments. But right now, I would say not AI. I'm definitely on the it's still just an advanced algorithm side until it can continue to make its own decisions
Right.
independent of human intervention.
Well, one of the things I think about, Josh, and this is coming from my experience in both commercial investment banking, especially on the consumer side, is I've seen a slower uptake of AI in banking, writ large, right? Really because of legal and compliance concerns. In other words, you know, if if you get something wrong in banking, the compliance and SEC and OCC
Hmm.
hammer is coming down, right? Versus if Amazon screws up an order while it's not good, right? It's just a completely different set of rules managing, a packaged good consumer product versus a bank account and a banking relationship and an investment
100% agree with
relationship.
that.
So, for me, it's more, you know, the regulatory environments are just so darn different. And I think, yeah, with what these guys have to deal with, I would see it'd be very challenging to not be able to explain. Right. When I think of AI, I think of neural networks and I think of that middle layer. Right. And it's like, there's stuff going on in there. But if
Hmm.
somebody says, why did it do that? You can't, I don't know. Because
Exactly.
it taught itself to do that, and not being able to explain that kind of stuff, maybe, Shapley values, but still, I think that's until AI becomes more explainable, I think it's going to be just a kind of like a not a great fit, right, with our legal and compliance environment, but we'll see.
100% agree with that. I mean, algorithms are predictable. You always know what an algorithm is going to do because it's structured, it's complex, but it is predictable. AI, completely unpredictable. You have no idea what it could do.
Yeah,
So if an AI decides that this company is more valuable and makes an adjustment based on that, and you say, well, that was the AI's decision, we don't have any fault here. That's a whole can of worms on the legal side, right?
yeah, for sure. Well, so I opened up with talking about one of your wise comments, right? That the only thing that will hold you back is you. So, like I mentioned, I'm a behavioral economist, so that that's where my brain goes, right? What are some of the psychological principles? So I think of things like hindsight bias, and really our nature is the weirdest thing, but it is our human nature to buy low and sell high.
Hmm.
Right? I mean, isn't that like, to me, that's like the weirdest thing, because why would our nature be to do exactly the wrong thing to make wealth? But it is, right? Emotions, FOMO, and all that kind of stuff. Um, so I'm just wondering, can you talk just a little bit about this? How do you see people hold themselves back? And really, what do you think the value is of robos? Do you think the robos are really helping people to not hold themselves back?
Yeah, have a I have a very good answer for this one, because it's such a good question. And my first experience with seeing how people react to situations that they don't expect, specifically when it came to investing, was what happened with GameStop back in 2021, where
Okay.
all of a sudden I saw people who either had never invested before in their lives or experienced investors not thinking like investors, but thinking like gamblers. people who weren't putting rationale behind their thoughts. People were putting the emotional side of what is my friend doing, or what is this celebrity doing, or what is the overall market doing, just based on thought and feeling alone, as opposed to actual grounded statistics. And so for that, you saw people, when GameStop started rapidly going up, even though there was no intrinsic value in the reason it was going up, it was purely, and it was a very national thing, where it was, people knew that it was not going up for any other reason than people were buying it based on just overall psychology.
Right.
People went in because they thought, oh, if I miss out on this opportunity, I'm never going to get another opportunity like this again. And that fear of missing out, which is a gambler's mindset. So what I think robo-advisors do so well is they split that. They remove that gambling mentality, that emotional reaction, our kind of fight or flight response if we buy a stock high and we see it drop, from the equation. Because if you have a robo-advisor in the middle that's making those decisions for you, if you have the automated, if you have the money automatically going into those accounts, and you have the robo-advisor handling it for you, you don't have to check that account for your portfolio to continually grow.
Right.
So I think an important part about that is also, first of all, being honest about your risk tolerance,
Right.
being clear about that, because that's another thing I see people do is many people, excuse me, specifically when it comes to robo-advisors, they know that if your time frame is 20 years or higher, you should have all of those risk management questions set to 10. You should be on the most risky. But some people have a hard time holding that and not selling when they see the market go through a downturn.
Right. Well, yeah, talk about that a little bit, because I'm, it's funny, in my class, we talk a lot about that, and we actually take them through. We use Wealthfronts, but we could use any of the, the risk tools. The risk tools are really simple, right? I think they've sort of figured out it's actually just a couple questions to assess somebody's true risk profile, right? And so I'll have the students go through it, and they'll, we'll see where they are. It's kind of an interesting little thing we do. So we'll start with, at the beginning, I just say, hey, we're just going to assess your risk personality, and we'll do that, and and I'll just sort of put it up as as the results, totally anonymous, but they can kind of see where the class is, and then I take them through to talk about it, right? And then at the end, we do it again, which is kind of cool. Invariably, what happens is the average risk assessment moves up, right? Maybe the class was at a 7 before, and now it's at a 9, or maybe it was at a 5 and now it's at a 9, or whatever. But but what I wonder about is, how can the robo, like let's get real, like there's a big sell-off, right? There's a 25% sell-off, whatever's going on in the world, whatever the latest freak out is, and the market's just selling off. What are the robos doing to say, so if you were a human advisor, right, like a typical traditional advisor, the client would call the advisor and say, sell it all, I'm freaking out. And the advisor would say, whoa, Bill or Mary, let's talk about it, right? Why are you feeling this way? And they all, honestly, I think nowadays wealth advisors are more psychologists than they are technicians.
I 100% agree with that. Yeah.
So I'm just curious, how do robo-advisors do something similar, or is there a sort of modern automated way that they kind of hold people in when they first feel that feeling of, oh, the world's coming to an end, I've got to sell it?
Absolutely. So out of pure curiosity and just keeping myself informed, I like to follow what people would call meme stocks are, just to see the psychology behind why people are making those decisions, even though we know that, putting emotions in investing is never a good solution. And so what they've done is, for the platform that I use at least, is that during periods of high volatility, when the market's adjusting rapidly, whether it's, because it's quote unquote a meme stock, or because there's a large sell-off, there are automated prompts that will pop up based on a stock that will let you know and provide education. And they essentially, in a digital format, without any person intervening, do exactly what would happen when you call your investment advisor and say, I want to sell it all. And when they say, whoa, that's what the applications are doing when they pop up, and they say, hey, you can absolutely sell this. That's well within your right, but here's the information to educate you about why that isn't the best decision. And in each process, when it actually comes to setting up your investment portfolio, specifically when it asks you all of those risk questions, it tells you, yes, if you put 2 or 3 or 4, you're not going to see as big downturns, but you're also not going to see as big
Right.
returns. And they're
Right.
they're very upfront about that. They're very honest about
Yeah.
that. So I think having those at both ends, where when you're setting it up for the first time, the expectation of what sort of investor you're going to be is set, but also
Right.
when it actually comes to it and people start freaking out, the ability to have an intervention and say, this is probably not the best idea. Here's some education
Right.
behind that, and kind of intervene there is the modern way of providing that information.
Yeah. That's right on. Yeah, and I'm sure every robo is a little different, right? In terms of almost putting like in speed bumps, right? Like it's almost like you don't want to make it too easy. Like it's funny because you think of their UI, making it easy is what a good UI does today, but when it comes to that, it's almost like you want to do the opposite, right? Put some friction in there, add some are you sure? Are you sure? I don't know what that is, but make it so it's not prohibitively annoying, but at the same time, you know, making sure that the person who's wanting to sell into a sell-off knows exactly is doing it for the right reason, I guess.
Yeah.
So, I am just with the robo-advisors, and the only comment I wanted to make is when we do the risk assessment with the students, I tend to, where I'm trying to get to is instead of thinking of the 1 to 10 risk assessment as being your risk tolerance, right? Or volatility risk is really what it's trying to get your tolerance to, is their goal should be to get it to the point where those numbers actually just have to do with time frame. So a
Yeah.
10 is 20 years, and then every number you just, and it's not linear, right? I think you can argue that probably even 7 to 10 years could be a 10, basically making it through a business cycle.
Mhm.
But sort of transform their thinking, right, into it needs to be volatility risk if it's going to drive you crazy and you might sell into it. But if you can get to the point where you can manage that, then those numbers are just about time,
Yeah.
right? And the longer the higher, and really the longer the higher, the more money you're going to make.
Yeah.
So anyway, so
Yeah.
if I could, I want to put you on the spot here for a second. You have already mentioned a couple of robo advisors, and I know
Mhm.
that you're all over this, but I am curious if you have a favorite,
Mhm.
or maybe even if you don't want to declare a favorite, maybe talk about one that you've had the longest history of. But then on the flip side of it, do you have a robo you really don't like, or maybe not, maybe don't even have to say that, a robo you tried and you decided wasn't for you? And so what I'm really trying to get at here is kind of, what do you like about your favorite robo advisors, the ones that you've used the longest, and what are some of the things that sort of moved you away from a robo advisor?
Yeah, so I can definitely touch on this. So I'm based in Canada. So the advisor that I have here personally is Canada's #1, which is Wealthsimple, and it has everything that I talked about in terms of the actual value of what a robo advisor should do. It has a clean user interface. It has low fees. It has really good conversion rates and for the currency as well. But it also just provides all those extra things like they call Wealthsimple Cash, where it's the you put your cash in, you get a high interest rate just for savings, and they have a thing where you can literally use it like a debit card called the Wealthsimple Cash Card, and they've got again those connections as they're continuing to evolve. And so for some of the other ones I've tried, basically the best equivalent for the States as well would be Wealthfront from what I've seen, just based
Okay.
on looking at it purely from a grid perspective. Something that is a red flag for me when it comes to advisors is, ironically as it might sound, no fees. So
Right.
when Wealthsimple initially launched, they say low fees, but there was never a no fee option. And you see a
Right.
lot of advisors out here with SoFi and other sorts of applications where it has no fees associated with it. And it almost makes you think, well, then how are they making their money? And they usually are making their money in a variety of different ways. But anytime I see something with no fees, there's just something that says it's too good to be true. And eventually digging into it, you tend to find something that
Right.
is too good to be true. Whereas with Wealthfront, what it does is, I know they have a $500 minimum, uh, investment amount that's required. But in terms of the fees pretty much match what our
Right.
Canadian equivalent here is Wealthsimple's across the board. Whereas they have that clean user interface, they have the low fees, and their assets under management are sizable
Right.
given the circumstances. And I think this also ties into what you talked about just before with how the 1 to 10 risk assessment should be seen as a time frame. So I've been investing for 5 years. That's from the first day I could invest to now I've been investing. And so I've gone through a market. So 2020 was when I started, and then 2021 obviously there was a boom, and then 2022 we had a bit of a slump again. So I got to see firsthand how the platforms react, not just with their marketing and overall aspect, but how they educated their
Right.
investors on how to react during different market cycles. And
Right.
so for Wealthsimple, their chief financial officer puts out an article every single month, basically talking about, hey, here's what happened this month. Here's everything you need to know, the important information,
Right.
the least important information, some of the funny information that happened. And they have an interesting way where they're educating people about the honest truth about how the market performed, but what does that actually mean for you? And so I feel like if a platform can successfully educate on
Right.
their investors on the financial side of things and be honest about how things are going, it's much more of a green flag when it comes to investing, because you know that, yes, the company is making money from the fees that you're paying, but as a result of that, their job is to educate you and make more returns, so you stick with them as opposed to turning away to somebody
Right.
else. So if you can find that financial education provided to you from a company and the honesty with how much they're charging in fees, that's a green flag for me any day.
Wow. I love that. Green flags and red flags.
Mhm.
Yeah, I have like just to react to that. I have two things that jumped out at me as you were talking through that. One is, your time frame of 5 years in 2020 to 2022. So I was chuckling to myself because I lived through, of course, the 2008, 2009 financial crisis, and lived through a month where I think equities dropped like 30+% in like 3 months. It was pretty insane. So anyway, if people that could survive that, right? And there was a lot of selling off, trust me, at
Mhm.
that time. But it's all relative, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, yeah, yeah. No, that's
If I can add a comment to that, it's
yeah,
interesting because when I started investing and 2021 things were going fantastic, I was again having those conversations with my friends where I was saying, hey, you guys should be investing. And then
right.
a lot of them who didn't get into it, they came back to me in 2022 and they said, ah, aren't you sorry you invested? Aren't and then and I'm like, no, this is a typical
No,
market downturn, but this is to be expected. This is
good.
one of the things, if you educate yourself financially about it, you can expect. And if anything, you're in the downturn right now, you know that you're going to be on the upturn soon. So there's
Yeah,
that to look
yeah.
forward to. But it's
Me,
all about having that long-term horizon when it comes to
good.
investing.
Love it. Love it. Well, the only other thing I wanted to mention in there too was so you mentioned SoFi and there's a couple like that. Schwab's the same way. Their robo is a no cost, and they've actually been fined by the SEC for related to that. So that's an interesting one. So I have dug a little into SoFi, and the only thing I can figure out is when you look at their ETFs, the back end fees on some of the ETFs that they provide, which I think are SoFi ETFs, they're pretty ridiculously high. Like I saw one was like at 50 basis points, where in my
Oh,
mind,
wow.
like general sort of indexed ETF should be around 5 basis points or something. So I think that's sort of their way of doing it. But for me, it's just all about I don't want to have to chase the knowledge to know how much this really costs. Because
Exactly.
if that means I have to keep up with it because hey, you might change. I love the idea of here's our number. It's 25 basis points or 30 or whatever, whatever it is. So I'm,
Mhm.
I'm, I'm with you on that. Well, Josh, we are coming to the top of the hour here, and I just want you to know this has been great. I love your energy, and I love what you're doing with Josh Mountain at YouTube. I think folks should check you out. And it's not just personal finance; you're broader than that. But I would say what you're doing with personal finance and financial education is really cool. But I did want to ask you, just from a closing standpoint, was there anything that we didn't cover, or any other comments that you wanted to wrap up with?
I think just reaffirming that message of pay off high interest debt, live on less than you make, create a savings and emergency fund, and then invest in something that's going to remove your emotions from the equation and have a long-term time frame. And if you can do those things, and especially in tax advantage accounts, you're going to be doing well. So
Yeah.
just want to reaffirm that, because I think the formula is out there. If people can just follow it and stick to that, they're going to do great.
I love it. Great message, Josh. Now, I do want to say, I know you're all the way in Canada, but I would love to have you join our class. We can do it remotely, perhaps this fall when we're talking about robo-advisors. I'll reach out to you. You don't have to commit now, but I think they would love to hear from you. But anyway, so
I'd
Josh,
be interested.
thank you so much again for your time, and this has been really great. And you have a wonderful day.
You as well. Looking forward to seeing what's next.